Aloha and welcome. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about functions as objects. We've talked about this before, but objects have three things. One, they have a type, they have a name, and they have a value. So the type of function is function object, and the name is going to be the name that we define after the def keyword. And the value, part of the value is going to be the compiled bytecode that represents the Python statements. So bytecode is the low-level implementation of the operations that comprise the Python statement. For example, you'll have like adding, subtracting, loading from memory that happens at a lower level. And that's what these Python statements are breaking down into. So you're going to have multiple statements that, multiple bytecode statements that actually implement those singular statements in Python. So with Python, code is compiled before execution by the interpreter. Interactive interpreters are compiling immediately after a line is entered and then executed. Modules that you import are compiled when they're imported, and functions that are compiled when the interpreter evaluates the function definition. So keep that in mind. I will go ahead and show you an example. They use this example in the book. Let me pull up VS Code here. But when we look in here, we've got add one is the definition. So it's a simple y equals x plus 1 return y. And the equivalent bytecode is going to be like this. So these are the actual statements that the bytecode statements that execute at a much lower level that actually perform this function right here. So it will compile down to this. You're never going to have to worry about this. You never see this as a programmer. You're dealing with the higher level language, so you really don't need to know about this. Just know that when you were talking about an object, this is our name. It's got a type, and if I run this right now and I print out let's say type of add one, and I run this, then we're going to see that it is a class function. So that's the type for a function. And then we have the value, and the value, part of the value is actually going to be the source code here that it compiles down to, the bytecodes that it goes down to. So that's really just explaining the three different parts that are at play here. So I want to go in and talk a little bit more about different things like, what does it mean when we say that a function is an object? Well, when we're executing this, first of all, let's talk about what it talks about here in the notes. Because a function is an object, we can use it in assignment statements. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and comment out the code up here, uncomment the code over here. And what we're doing here, oops, let's not overdo it. Opposite of what I intended to do. So we're defining a function here called myFunction. It's just going to print hi. So then what we can do, and this is really neat in my opinion, because this is stuff you couldn't do in other languages before, in a lot of different things that I've messed with, like VBScript and other languages. You can't do something like this. We can take the function, my function. Actually, we take a new variable, your function, and we can say equals my function. So what's going to happen is your function is now going to point to the definition for my function. So it's going to point, if let's say this was the code up here, the bytecode and everything that my function referred to, it's not, but let's say it was. Then when we say your function equals my function, your function would also point to that. So they're now pointing, both those references are pointing to the same place. So if I run your function at this point, and I go up here and I hit the play, you see that it runs and it says hi, even though we're running your function, not my function. They both point to the same place. And notice when we're doing this assignment, we're not putting the parentheses here on my function, because if we do that, it's actually going to execute my function, and it will return the result of that, which is none, because if you look at here, we don't have a return value. That's what we called a void function, and it's going to return the keyword none. So if we did this, your function would be equal to none. And if you tried to execute that, wackiness will ensue. So we'll get this, and it's going to say none type object is not callable, because we're not dealing with it. We've assigned it a value and not an actual function. So we go back there, then we get the assignment of the function, we call it, and it prints as we expected high. So yeah, this is what you need to keep in mind as far as functions go in terms of being an object. I've also, let me go ahead and comment this out, and we'll go down to the next thing that they talked about. So the cool thing about functions are, not only can you assign other variables to that function and have them both point in the same place, you can actually call functions and have functions sent in as arguments, or you can have it return values. So what I want to do here is uncomment all this code right here. So the code we have here, we've got one function that says it's called print Bob. It simply prints Bob. We've got print John. It prints John. And then we've got our third function, which is print greeting, and it takes in a function here, and that function is print name. So we can pass in one of the two functions that we have named over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to print out the word hi, and then we're just going to put a space after it. We don't want that return line. And then we're going to call on the function that we passed in, and that will do whatever the function says, which is going to be either print Bob or print John. I'm partial to my own name, so we're going to use print John here. And let's see what happens. Let's do a nice little clear screen here and hit run. And what do we see? We see hi John. So we're getting hi. And then we do the print name. Print name is John. So it's then going to execute print John, and it's going to print John. So we could have changed this to Bob. If we did that, we would have, as you would expect, hi Bob. So this is just one of the cool things about it. We can also make functions that return functions. And when we're using a function, let's put it this way, a function that takes as a parameter a function, or returns a function as its return value, we call those higher order functions. So it's not something they teach in the book here, but that's something to keep in mind. You'll hear about that in other places when they're talking about higher order functions. That's what they mean. It's just simply a function that takes a function as an argument, or it returns a function as the return value. So keep that in mind. And that is the end of this section. So we're going to go over some common errors that you may come across with functions in the next chapter. So stay tuned.